Basu Godin Notebook. 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 Basu Godin. Welcome back to the Basu and Godin Notebook. We're Monday, June 17th. I am Marc-Antoine Godin with Arpin Basu. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. We're this much closer to the draft, which is 11 days away right now.
Yeah.
So should be exciting. Stanley Cup final. Lives to fight another day as Edmonton has forced a transcontinental trek back to Florida for everyone. But yeah, we're getting closer to some real legitimate news happening around the Canadians. Obviously, everyone is enamored with the draft. It's, we're gonna discuss some possibilities here, but really nothing much has changed since our last episode. I mean, it's very difficult to get a sense of which way the Canadians are leaning and what's going to happen. So I know there's a lot of people wondering what's going to happen, but we're wondering the same thing. So there's not much to add in that regard, really.
Well, there's the Daniel Milstein, his agency Gold Star, the Gold Star camp of prospects that starts tomorrow in Florida. And one of the guys that the Canadians will be eyeing at the draft is Ivan Demidov. He's going to be at that camp there. It's unclear whereas he'll be able to do the on-ice testing because of his knee injury.
I don't think he will. I don't think it's unclear. I don't think I've heard he's not doing it. So
okay, good.
Yeah,
good. So, what do you think? What do you think the Canadians? Because obviously everybody's going to go down there and learn more about Demidov. There are some other prospects that are also going to be attending because Milstein's agency is growing exponentially. I mean, he's got tons of players, both already on NHL contracts and also some prospects through the draft every year. So there's Demidov, there's other guys, but Demidov's clearly the focal point. So for Montreal, it's going to be there. What do you think they'll want to see from him at that camp? And do you think that it might move the needle in any way in deciding whether he's their man or not?
Well, I think for the Canadians and for any other team, there's going to be a lot of interpreting literal interpreting, because I'm pretty sure he's going to have to speak through an interpreter, but, trying to judge the sincerity of his intentions to get to North America as soon as humanly possible. Basically at upon the expiry of his current deal, which has 1 year left with the Scott St. Petersburg organization. I think I don't know how many of the teams have doubts about his intentions. So maybe there's not much to learn there. But the doubts,
it's not entirely up to him.
Well, that's it. There's that, the other side of it. Like, I think if I were a team talking to him, I would want to hear his perspective of how he feels the next year of his life would go for him if he doesn't sign an extension. What are the possible repercussions of that? What could Scott St. Petersburg do to try to encourage him or influence him or coerce him, whatever degree of language you want to use? What does he think could happen there? I mean, I think teams have their own impression, but it would be interesting to hear what he thinks, obviously, and just get a sense of his personality and his character. I mean, I think there's now I doubt what the interesting part of this is. I mean, I don't know this to be true, but I doubt there's going to be a time limit on these meetings because I don't think all 30 teams are going to want to talk to him, right? I mean, I think there's a reasonable, let's say 12 or 15 teams would want to talk to him, I don't think he's getting past the middle of the first round, so in a worst case scenario, if he really were to slide significantly, he's not going to get that far. And so I don't know if they're going to put a time limit on it, especially with considering that they're going to need to have some interpreter there present. So that's an interesting opportunity. The combine only gives you 20 minutes, and it's very much like a speed dating kind of environment, whereas this could potentially be different. Even, with Michkov last year, was the same kind of thing when he met with teams at the draft itself or just prior to the draft in Nashville. My understanding was they weren't very much restricted time wise with how much time they could spend with him. But the fact that it was done through an interpreter kind of took away from the dynamic that you like to have, obviously, with a kid that you're using such a high pick on. So yeah, that's gonna, for the Canadians at least, is gonna shed a lot of light. I believe Demidov is gonna be doing media interviews as well down there. I know. So we should get some insight from him in a public way, which would be interesting for the rest of us. But yeah, as far as the Canadians are concerned, if any doubts that they have, which I believe they have some, could be lessened or heightened or impacted in some way based on what happens over the next few days down in Florida.
Well, I think their doubts are more in relations to Scott St. Petersburg than the player himself. But getting to know the guy and having a sense of, his views are, his values also, I think it's always a good thing. And when you talk about an interpreter, I think that's where the Canadians are in good spot, having a head scout who's actually Russian and who can speak Russian directly to the kid. So there's going to be a more efficient discussion, a more genuine, also back and forth. You can get to understand the kid a lot more when there's no interruption in the flow of the discussion than when there is an interpreter. Not to mention the fact that depending on who translates, sometimes the answers are really softened and packaged in a way that any hesitation, anything that might be slightly risky or whatever, if nobody in the room understands that language, well, the translator might arrange it so that the kid looks good, and it might be a more slick version, and then probably some raw comments that the kid might say.
Well, yeah, but I think, to be clear, I think Nick Bobrov would be there to check on the translation more so than to run the interview without any translation happening in real time. Like, I think everyone else who's in the room is going to want to know they're going to want to know what's going on and be able to ask their own follow-up questions. So I think the advantage of having Nick Bobrov is you can be assured to some extent that what the translator says is what the kid actually said. And that way you have that kind of a check on it, depending on who's doing the interpreting of it. Again, it is, but it's definitely an advantage that they have, one they had with Michkov last year as well. But my understanding is that they did use an interpreter last year, even though Nick was there. So I would imagine they would do the same thing again this year with Demidov. But yeah, it's a big opportunity, and it's a big opportunity for every team. And if the kid really interviews well, like, who knows? Maybe they'll convince a Chicago. Maybe he'll convince a Chicago to use their pick on him. Maybe they'll convince an Anaheim to use their pick on him. I don't know if Columbus is all that high on him, but maybe they will be as well. I mean, it's probably the most important interview of this draft cycle, really, is this kid's interview with whatever number of teams are going to talk to him, including Montreal, to really influence where he gets drafted, because the level of sincerity and convincingness, that's not even a word, his ability to convince the teams of his intentions and of his desire to play in the National Hockey League as soon as possible, to go a long way in affecting how teams feel about him, because this is their first and only shot to really get some time to talk to him, unlike basically all of the other prospects being considered in the top 10. Not basically, literally all of the other prospects being considered in the top 10. So, So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens, and I'm eager to see some of the chats he has with media down there as well. That'll be an interesting thing.
The thing I wonder about, his expression or his disclosed willingness to come and play North America as soon as 25, 26. So after the expiration of his contract. I don't know if he sticks to that and he goes back to Russia, and how would they handle him? Would they leave him in the MHL, because they could? I mean, he'll only be 18 years old. If he was to graduate with SKA, how much ice time would he be given? That's just that year of development. It's going to be affected by that precise situation. And not to mention, the other thing is that the head coach over there is not a career head coach. He's a guy who was his family were friends of the party. He's from the Gazprom lineage, if you will. He's very that man. Roman Rothenberg is connected at the KHL level in every aspect. I mean, management and whatnot. But he's not traditionally a coach per se. So if you leave your the new crown jewel of your pipeline in the hands of that guy, how much his development will be positively or negatively affected by that. Those are also questions that come in the way. But to me, it's first and foremost is if there's an agreement to let him go after next year. In the meantime, will they say, well, if you're leaving, pal, you're going to spend another year in that league where you had no business of finishing the season anyway, because you're too good for that league. So that'll be interesting.
And it's worth reminding people that there's a rule in Russia where players on the final year of their contract cannot be loaned to another KHL team. So the way Michkov was loaned to Sochi 2 years in a row, they couldn't do that with Demidov according to the rules in place in the KHL. So it would most likely mean that he either plays, well, I mean, I guess there's a possibility that SKA would look at him and be like, okay, well, if we have a year with this kid and he's good enough, he'll help us win. Let's just take him on our team. Admittedly, that's generally not how this works. We saw it with Romanov, who made his intentions to leave very clear, got scant. He did stay. He was on the big club, but got very little ice time. With his development was not a concern of theirs whatsoever. So that could be a similar thing that happens with Demidov. But since it's only 1 year, I think it's a risk that you have to take. But I think it is a concern of not just the Canadiens, of any team considering Demidov, is what is going to happen over the next year if he doesn't sign that extension. And if he does sign that extension, how long does that extension have to be? How long do we have to wait to get him? I mean, it would probably be a 2-year extension, and then you're looking at 3 years until Demidov is here. So it's definitely a factor that Demidov can influence with some of his answers coming up in Florida.
All right. So did you have anything to add about the draft before we move on to our next thing?
Not really. I mean, I think there is. I think in the last episode we had mentioned that if neither Demidov or Lindstrom are there at 5, that they could and maybe should lean towards taking a defenseman. I don't know how clear cut that is. This is just me speculating, but I don't know if that's clear cut dividing line where it's Demidov, Lindstrom, or we open it up to other candidates. Iginla and Seneca, to me, without putting a percentage on it, just seem to be possibilities of some sort, and that's just a hunch. I mean, you look at their player profiles, and they seem to be high upside plays that could warrant the consideration of, maybe the Canadiens realizing maybe number 5, it's too early to pick them, but who cares? Like, we have the 5th pick. It's not our fault. And it's if we like the player, just take him. And we don't really care if it's considered a reach or whatever. And so I don't know. I don't know where those guys are compared to some of the D that could be available, namely a Salayev or a Zboboyem or a Parik or whatever. I don't know where they are, but I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I feel like it's at least a possibility that they just decide that they don't care what anyone else thinks. And frankly, they've proven that they don't care what anyone else thinks over the last 2 drafts. And they just take the forward that they like at that spot.
Sure. Well, I think that one big factor will be, do they determine that Iginla or Seneca are potential future first liners? If they're just top 6 guys and they think that they've got a number 1 defenseman that's at their disposal, like that's assuming that Lindstrom and Demidov are taken, for example. If you have to choose between a guy who could be a number 1 defenseman or a second line winger, that's to me, that's the choice is obvious. But if they evaluate that either Iginla or Seneca is on track to become a first line winger, then it's a lot more debatable. So I think that we don't know, we're not privy to that information as to exactly how high they esteem those kids and they see their ceiling to be right at this point. Obviously, they'll tell us more after they've drafted one of these kids. But but I think that this is a factor. It's just you have to be sure that if you go with let's say the next tier of forward, that their ceiling is still high enough. Otherwise, you just draft for need and you forget about the best player available.
Well,
and that's the wrong thing to do 10 days out of 10.
Well, this is where I see somewhat of a similarity between Slav, Lindstrom, and Seneca, in the sense that they all showed a sharp rise in their development curve late, closer to the drafts. Even though Seneca, I think in his days playing in the GTA, was one of the top players as a younger player, but still, the way he figured things out, his late growth spurt, learning how to play in his new body, learning how to skate with his new body, get his balance, get his bearings. A lot of it kind of tracks with Slav's kind of progression a little bit and learning how to play at his size. And in a different way, Lindstrom's, which is more based on just playing at an elite level and learning how to make decisions quickly, how to see things on the ice, and just learning this caliber of hockey later than most kids. If you look at Seneca, and even based on everything he said at the draft, at the combine rather, to the media and presumably to the teams themselves, this is a kid that's still learning how to play with this big frame, a frame that could very potentially still be growing. That's an enticing package. And if you look at their draft history, kids whose development curve was on a steeper incline closer to the draft are kids that this administration has liked a lot. And to me, Seneca kind of fits that model just based on nothing. This is no inside information or anything. This is just looking at their draft history and seeing a kid that kind of fits that curve as the player they took number 1 overall. I think even Reinbacher, you can make the argument that applied. So I'm wondering if that applies to Seneca as well.
Yeah. Do you think that the 2.5 inches that favor Seneca will give him an edge over Iginla necessarily? If they were to choose between
combined with the hands. I mean, the hands are ridiculous, right? So it's. I mean, yeah, maybe. I mean, I think there's a lot to like about Iginla. He's basically been raised from birth as a pro hockey player. Like, I mean, there's a lot to like about TJ Iginla. An elite shot. Played big in big games. There's a lot of things that they like. But yeah, I think as far as the curve is concerned, and yes, Iginla had a difficult season last year in Seattle, was healthy scratched. So you could argue that he's also on a steep upswing, but plus the the fact he's going to play center in Kelowna next year is probably pretty interesting to teams, to see that he could be a possibility at center. But yeah, I just feel like the late growth spurt element of Seneca and just the adjustment that he's making to that and his late season push offensively and in the playoffs could just be a reflection of him just beginning to tap the potential of his size and his reach and learning how to use it effectively. I don't know. I see similarities there with Lindstrom, with Slav, and even with Reinbacher. And so just judging on if you can use that limited sample of how this administration looks at these kids, I think Seneca kind of fits that model, assuming Lindstrom obviously is gone.
We can even go back to the previous administration because KK was a late riser too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. So I guess that's the argument against doing something like that. But KK was always a tall, lanky kid. That's kind of, and he also grew up in a very pro style environment, right? So it was like, he didn't have a Hall of Famer for a dad, but he did have, a professional hockey coach as a dad. And so he grew up basically at the rink of the local Liga team, surrounded by Finnish pro hockey players his whole life. So it's not a guarantee that growing up in that environment makes you into a good pro, I guess is the thought there. But yeah, I just wanted to add that because that's just a thought that came to me this week as I was sort of looking at it, and I think there are some similarities in Seneca's development path that could maybe entice the Canadians to take him. But that's just me spitballing.
Okay. All right. Listen, this week, these last few days, there's been interesting news coming out of Columbus. That is that when Patrik Laine comes out of the NHLPA program, the assistance program, which he will be allowed to do as soon as the Columbus Blue Jackets resume practice at camp, or they open camp, basically. So he would like a change of scenery. It's been agreed upon between the team and the player, so they'll be looking to move him. So we're not going to. I think that this sentence is the only time where I'm going to mention the names Zegras and Netches. So it's out of the way. We can ignore those two guys. But I think that it's interesting this week to dive a bit deeper on the Laine possibility, because even though it represents a risk for the Canadians and there's a lot of unknown, actually not just for the Canadians, but for any team, because of the salary, because of the fact that this production has been really up and down these last few years, because of also the mental aspect that you're not entirely sure of the type of individual you're going to get when you trade for him. There is a chance for any team that could be interested in that player. But at the same time, if you're looking to swing for a home run and you made some money, you're ready to make some money available to make short-term improvements, and you're looking to basically add to, the type of high-quality talent and a potential top six forwards, well, that list is short, and Laine is definitely part of it. And the acquisition cost, because of the salary ticket that comes with it, might not be crazy either. So there's a lot. You put all those things together, I see a potential fit for Laine in Montreal.
Yeah, I do too. It is a reasonable risk. Columbus would probably be willing to keep some of that cap hit at $8.7 million. Does this guy think he's Sidney Crosby with the $8.7 million? Anyhow, but it's actually a bigger monetary hit. He has a $2 million signing bonus in each of the next 2 years, and a $7.1 million base salary. So really, you're looking at, if you do it prior to July 1st, assuming that his bonus is paid out on July 1st, you're looking at $9.1 million in actual cash, which I don't know. I know everyone thinks that the Canadians have a bottomless pit of cash, but it's a consideration that you have to
Yeah.
make that adds a bit of a risk element. Even though it's only a $400,000 difference between that and the cap hit, but still it's there. So, I think this is a very reasonable risk to take. He's going to be, he's a player that you would hope could benefit from the development infrastructure that the Canadians have put in place. They've already shown a willingness to take that gamble numerous times. The Doc trade is an example of it. The Newhook trade is an example of it. The Matheson trade is an example of it. Like there are many instances, and sometimes it didn't work out. But the Gurianov trade was an example of it, where they hoped to bring him into their environment, see what he can do with their instruction, and maybe they can unlock what was previously seen in Gurianov's case. It didn't work in that case, but just the fact that they tried it, instead of going out and getting another draft pick for Evgeny Dodonov, they tried to take that risk instead. Shows a willingness to take some degree of risk. Now, in Gurianov's case, his contract was expiring. That really mitigated that risk. In this case, it's a 2-year commitment. I think everything you said is true. They have a certain amount of cap space to play with. Perhaps instead of asking Columbus to keep money, they could send back, say, Dvorak and get his money off the books and make it more palatable for 1 year at least. That could be an option. Like, I think there's a lot of ways to go about it, but I think it's a good risk to take. Especially
would you agree to get more money and ask them to retain less, but flip those first round picks between 4 and 5?
Yeah, sure. You could throw that into the mix. I think that would be a minimal cost to pay from Columbus's perspective. Like, if that's the sweetener, moving down one spot in the draft, and you don't have to take on or keep that much of the money. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, it's I just feel it's a good risk. It's a good gamble, but like Laine, has obviously had his issues in Winnipeg, had his issues in Columbus prior to this, but maybe what he's going through right now in getting treatment in the player assistance program, maybe that was part of the issue in Winnipeg and part of the issue in Columbus until now. And maybe you're getting a different player coming out of that program who has a different perspective and a different outlook on things. So
yeah,
it's the talent alone is worth gambling on, but even that part of it to me is worth gambling on. Now, you'll hear varying reviews of how good the NHL, NHLPA player assistance program is. I think there's some people who went through the program who thought it was less than great. There are others, Carey Price being one of them, but there's several others who the program helped very much. And maybe Laine will be one of those players. And so, I think there is a fit there. There's a real fit. And that pick swap is something I hadn't thought of, but that's an interesting wrinkle to add here. And that would help their chances of getting the forward that they really want in this draft.
Absolutely.
Would almost guarantee it, actually. Come close to guaranteeing it.
Yeah. They would, especially in Caden Lindstrom's case. It would increase their chances if Lindstrom is their guy. Yeah.
For them not to get one of them, it would have to go Celebrini, Demidov, Lindstrom, which is possible, I suppose. Yeah. In which case, you've got Levshunov sitting there. You've got in which case you almost have to take Levshunov, right? I mean, it's really, there would be.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So but in reality, I don't think Levshunov is getting past Anaheim. That would be my guess, and considering their stated desire for a right shot defenseman that could produce and could play. He seems like a guy that Verbeek would seem to like. I don't know. That's just me guessing there, but But yeah, swapping those picks, taking Laine off their hands, giving him the fresh start that he has expressed he would like through his agent, Columbus's desire to help him get that fresh start. I mean, it seems like a perfect match. We'll see if the Canadiens are interested, but generally they have called on all these players. Every time a player's name hits the trade rumor market, the Canadiens are in on it to some extent, just as a fact-finding mission more than anything else. So I'm sure they'll consider this one as well. Just like they made calls on Zegras, they made calls on Necas. They're going to make a call on Laine, I would almost guarantee it.
So among the risks linked to the player, there's a couple I think of. There's one that I remember, I think it was the last time that he was in uniform for Columbus when they came in Montreal. And we were watching the game next to each other, and we looked at each other at some point, and he had no interest in back-checking or getting involved in the play when he didn't have the puck. It was completely disheartening. You know, a lot has been made of Pierre-Luc Dubois' famous last shift or with Columbus.
One of the last shifts, yeah. Ago.
But Laine's that night, he seemed to have a few of those shifts. Yeah. And so you need to have a version of him where he's rekindled a love of the game and a desire to be a difference maker and be involved in every part of the game. Because otherwise, if he's just waiting to get the puck and shoot it the way that he can, it becomes a very, very flawed player and a big ticket for so many flaws. So you need, when you have a guy coming out of the assistance program with a clear head, there's a chance that it might be like a pitcher in baseball comes back from a Tommy John surgery, and all of a sudden there's a fresh perspective. There's new capabilities to him as a player. It can go both ways, but this is one aspect I think that you've heard it and seen it to a certain extent with Yevgeny Kuznetsov, the way that he knows that it's his last chance in the NHL. He wants to embrace it and get the most out of his opportunity, and he seems very sincere in that. And that sort of commitment, that's what you want to see in the player that's been put in the tough spot or who has put himself in a tough spot. And now the league looks at that player and say, okay, well, now it's the ball's in your camp to show us what you're really made of. So that the onus would be put on Laine for that. And the other thing is, yes, he's been struggling in Columbus, but if you look past this present season, the point per game aspect was still pretty interesting. The issue has not been as much production as just the ability to stay healthy. He's had so many injuries. I mean, he had a clavicle fracture. He had a triceps injury. In the past, also, he had an oblique strain. All injuries that led him to miss 10, 12, 19, X number of games, long absences. So I think that's one of the things with Patrik Laine is that, yeah, he's big, he's powerful and whatnot, but he's been having a hard time staying healthy. So the bottom line is, since the 2018-19 season in Winnipeg, so we're looking at his last 6 years, he has not reached the 70-game mark in any of those seasons. So that's
last 5 years.
That's another issue. I think So that's
last 5 years. Yeah,
that's a concern. You know, you have to take this into account when you acquire a player like that.
100%. But all of that is mitigated by the 2 years left on his contract. It's really, it's worst case scenario. You bury the contract in Laval and that's that. I mean, I don't know, or I don't know. I think it's the low term on the contract. The fact that he is faced with the urgency of his NHL career teetering a little bit and at a turning point in his career, you would hope increases the focus and the dedication and the determination that's required to succeed in this league. And so I think, the 2-year term provides a counterpoint to all of that. Yes, everything you said, all the risks are true. Well, it's only 2 years, and so it's not.
That's what makes the gamble interesting. The fact that it's not you're not taking a forever contract. So
yeah. So and so finally, the final bit of news that we wanted to get to before getting to the mailbag was the Canadiens getting Oliver Kapanen's name on an entry-level contract, a 3-year entry-level deal. He has also agreed to a contract with Timra in the Swedish Hockey League. If I were to bet, I think he'll still be playing in Timra next season. He would kind of have to make the Canadiens out of training camp to not be doing that. I would imagine that is an unlikely scenario and that the Canadiens are fine with that. Having him play in a league that is closer to the style that is played in the NHL than the Liga is in Finland is a positive for him. But down the road, with him and Owen Beck now under contract with the Canadiens, you have the possibility exists that your future bottom 6 centers are in the pipeline and they're on their way to Montreal. And that's, I think, a pretty interesting thing to have locked down. And they're 2 pretty intriguing prospects to nail down those spots. The one thing is that traditionally on teams that win, those spots are generally held by older guys. They're generally veteran positions. The third and fourth line center, the guys who are going to go play, hard minutes and face difficult situations. You generally reserve those for veterans. But that doesn't mean you can't do it this way and have younger players filling those roles and growing into those roles as time goes on. But all in all, I think Oliver Kapanen's development is a positive for this administration. Another prospect they inherited from the previous administration that is panning out and looking pretty good so far.
Yeah, I think that if he was to continue on the offensive development that he showed in the second half of the season and during the playoffs, and he banks on that and continues in the same trend next year, then it's going to be very exciting. I mean, he's been playing well in the past, but now that he's really made an impression offensively lately, and I think that it would be even more exciting to see him grow on that and have a bigger sample of that offensive output. I think you make a great point regarding having 2 young centers. Ultimately, they might battle one the other, Kapanen and Beck for the same spot. But if down the road they were to occupy number 3 and number 4 center spot, you could also start Kapanen on the wing. I think that Beck has got some, there's a face-off ability with Beck that makes him very attractive to start his career right away as a centerman. We'll see that in Laval this year and see how he does at the professional level. But at some point, the day that they'll be in Montreal in 2 years probably 2 years from now, you could have one on the wing and the other one in center, so that you compensate for the fact that you don't want to be too young down the middle with those 2 guys.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that one of them could. I mean, Beck, as you mentioned, is really a prototypical center, and I think that's where the Canadiens would want him playing. Kapanen is as well, frankly. I mean, honestly, like he was playing an important center role on the Finnish national team. Like it's really unusual and commendable that he was able to get that role on the men's national team. It just spoke to how well his season went this year in Liga. But yeah, I think it's and I think we had before we get to the official mailbag, I think our friend Lori was asking on X, what are the chances that one of or both of Beck and or Kapanen replaces Dvorak and or Evans this coming year, I believe. And I would put that, eventually for sure, but this season I would put that at very, very low. It's very low. Beck needs a year in the AHL. That's a given to me. And I think Kapanen would benefit from a year in the SHL. to play more of a North American style game rather than the sort of high checking, low event hockey that generally gets played in Finland. So I think in both cases, a stint in a different league for a year at least would benefit them. And so I don't think. Plus, it allows Dvorak's contract to expire. It allows Evans's contract to expire. That gives Canadians more options. So it's really makes sense for the Canadians to stick with those two guys for one more year and then make some decisions. I don't think they would bring back Christian Dvorak necessarily. Jake Evans, we'll have to see what happens to him at the end of this deal.
Yeah, and it's also those guys there's no point in rushing those rookies in the NHL right away and make way for them. They're not like guys that you cannot live without. And if you can provide some value for your team at the trade deadline, that's interesting. I'm sure that they look at Christian Dvorak and they're thinking if he was able to stay healthy, we could definitely find a use for that guy in terms of, we were talking about faceoffs, but also second power play, first penalty killing. There's an interesting, I'm not advocating for them to keep him long term, but I think that for the upcoming season, there's definitely a use that they could find for this guy. And I think that with the center line for next year of Suzuki, Doc, Dvorak, and Evans, you don't have a one guy that's amazing, although Suzuki has made some nice progress this year. But overall, you could certainly do worse as a center line in those four guys.
Yeah,
as long as they remain healthy, obviously.
And the thing that's interesting about Dvorak, like you mentioned, the trade deadline, players like him often generate interest. Guys who can win draws, who can kill penalties, who can fill in on the power play in a pinch, who can play it further up the lineup in a pinch. If he has a decent season this year, and let's say the Canadians are on the fringes of the playoff race or just a few points out or whatever, and they don't want to completely blow up their team, but they would like to monetize some of these guys whose contracts are expiring. You could trade, depending on how Beck's season goes in Laval, having those 50-odd games of experience in Laval, maybe at that point you could be like, well, we can afford to trade Dvorak and replace him with Beck at that point and not lose a whole lot, and still remain competitive and still be able to go into our dressing room and tell the guys, okay, listen, yes, we traded an important player, but we believe in this kid. We believe he's ready to fill that role. And we feel that we haven't weakened your team today, kind of thing. So that's a possibility that Beck can make a possibility by having a good season in Laval. But the jump to the AHL should not be underestimated. It's not an easy league to succeed in. Shane Wright's had some success in the AHL, but it hasn't been stop the presses, let's get him up to it's a difficult league. It's tough. And so, and that's just an example. I'm just using Shane Wright as an example because he's a really highly touted prospect playing in the AHL. Other highly touted prospects in the AHL have done really well. Like Yuri Kulich, for instance, was great in the AHL. Almost right off the bat. David Jiricek on defense. We'll see what happens with Beck this year, but it's depending on how he does, maybe that opens up even more options at the trade deadline this year.
I like that scenario of calling him up after the trade deadline once you've moved Dvorak. To me, it makes plenty of sense. Mm-hmm. I don't know about Evans. I don't know what they'll do, but I think that it's more than possible. I find when you tell me about Dvorak presented this situation or scenario like this, it makes a lot of sense to me. So We'll see. But Kapanen, it's going to be Timrå next season, and either Laval the year after or jump to Montreal. Let's hope that he's ready for the show in 2026.
All right, mailbag time. We do a mailbag every Monday,
Let's go to the mailbag. Mailbag. They reach out and they write you up.
Okay, we're going to make this relatively quick. We had 1 billion questions. That's an official number, 1 billion.
Yes.
And so let's start with this. This is not a draft related question. There were a lot of draft related questions. I think we kind of addressed them at the earlier part of the show, so we're going to try and stick to some different kinds of questions. This one comes in from Irvin. He says, "Hi guys, do you see any merit in the Habs trying to bring back either or both of Tyler Toffoli and Sean Monahan? It seems to me they would be solid veterans who are popular with the fans and their teammates and who might be available on fairly short-term contracts. Thanks, keep up the great work, and no, I am not from Newfoundland." This is Irvin Shine. You see, so you don't have to be from Newfoundland to get into the mailbag. So please stop doing the gymnastics necessary to get some sort of tie to Newfoundland to get mentioned on the show. It's not a prerequisite. It doesn't have to be from Newfoundland.
It's getting old now.
Well, it's not. It's fun. I think it's fun. I like it, but it's but just know that you don't have to do that to get on the show. So, so Sean Monahan to me seems like someone that Winnipeg's going to work hard to bring back. I don't know the extent to which those talks have advanced or how it's going, but it seems to be somewhat mutually beneficial. I think they like the fit there. I think he could see a path to a competitive team that could possibly win with an all-world goaltender and a lot of talent around him. Tyler Toffoli, on the other hand, should be hitting the market. And, he's made it clear that he wants some term. And the way that sort of Tom Fitzgerald seemed to suggest the discussions went in New Jersey was that Tyler Toffoli was going to ask for an ungodly amount of term. At his age, I believe he's 33, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that the term that he's looking for, he's actually 32. Sorry, he just turned 32.
Oh.
I don't know that the term that he's looking for is all that is quite as outrageous as Tom Fitzgerald made it sound. I think he's looking for 4 years, which brings him to age 36. But still, he has proven over the last several years that he is a remarkably consistent scorer. The group, I mean, he's top 30 goals in each of the last 2 seasons. They are the 2 best goal scoring seasons of his entire career. It's and really, and the familiarity with the group here, like, I don't know, it's I think Tyler Toffoli liked it in Montreal, although I didn't really get to know him much because he was here throughout COVID and never actually met him.
I spoke to him on Zoom a great deal.
Spoke to him on Zoom a great deal, but I did get the impression that he enjoyed it here. So, yeah, maybe the Canadians can make that work. 4 years wouldn't be outrageous. It would be a little longer than I think the Canadians are willing to go on a UFA signing, but it's also not outrageously long to want. So if he's willing to take a 4-year term, then yeah, the Canadians should at least inquire and see if they can find some common ground there.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about that term. I think that it falls really in the in-between, that he's a good player, there's no doubt about it, but I think that the Canadians should either go for an older player signing short-term deal so that he can help bolster their top 6 in the short term and help out Kirby Dach's development, for example, or a long-term on a much younger guy. I find that Toffoli, you talk about a 32-year-old guy who looks for a 4-year deal. It's really, it screams to me a team that needs that type of player right now. And he would look at a fit where first he would stay there. I'm sure that there would be some no trade protection because he's been moving around a lot these last few years. So he would try to probably put his luggage down for a good chunk of time there. But he would be looking for a team that could win. And that team would look, you mentioned the fact that he's been a very productive player these past 2 years. It needs to be, I think that when you look at a guy signing him 4 years, he needs to be part of the solution. In this case, for the Canadians, it's neither a rebuilding type of move and it's neither a stopgap type of move. So, as much as I like him, I don't
well,
really see it.
Well, the way I see it going would be For the next 2 years, you get a top six. That you fill the hole in your top six with him. 2 years from now, you replace him with, say, Joshua Roy, or maybe even next year with a guy like Demidov, or 2 years from now with Lindstrom, who's probably going to take about that long to be there. And then he becomes a veteran presence on your bottom six for another 2 years. And then when presumably you're well, for a good amount of money, but by then I think Gallagher's contract would be close to an end. Anderson's contract would be close to an end. I mean, there are ways to make it work. I don't think it would be that crazy of a move just because of the current need and how it wouldn't be an issue down the road if you were to play further down the lineup. He would add some oomph to a second power play unit, which I know the Canadians want to have two legitimate power play units.
For sure.
It checks a lot of boxes for them. Yes, there's some term there that's not ideal, but you have to give somewhere. And I actually think the dollar amount with him won't be outrageous. It's within reasonable numbers for a guy who's put up back-to-back 30-goal seasons over the last 2 years. So I don't know. I could see a fit there. That's all I'm saying. But I think your points are valid too. But you have to give when you're signing a UFA. Something has to give. You're not going to get the ideal. Like either you're paying him too much money or you're giving him too much term. There's something that's not quite ideal in every UFA signing. Like you go into that knowing that and accepting that. So that's kind of the reality of the UFA market.
Okay, there's Maxime Laroche who's asking us, what are your thoughts about the decentralized drafts coming soon? We hear a lot of stories about floor trades like Burke with the Sedin. Will it really change things? It's topical because the draft, as you said, Arpin, is 11 days away. It's meant to be the last draft in its current format, so the whole league basically converging at the same point. It's going to be a spectacular venue because the event's going to be held at the Sphere in Las Vegas. But it's signaling a change. The NHL looking to do something a lot closer to what the NFL is doing, the NBA is doing, and they got a glimpse of it. Despite what they wanted during COVID. So, and I think that since then, I think the teams. Some might have had a change of heart, but I think that the direction, what we heard when the teams overwhelmingly voted in favor of changing the draft and decentralizing it, is that the front offices could stay in their own things. There's always a quick turnaround between the draft and free agency. And this year, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, the draft is 28, 29, and then you got free agency on July 1st. So all that moving from one city to another, it's a lot of wasted time and energy. If you stay in your own things, you can pivot, do many things at once. There's a lot of guys that do their business prior to arriving on the floor. They make their calls. They've got their lines in the water and they're bait in the water. They're waiting for the fish to bite before they arrive at the draft itself. So does it really change something that they're not all on site at the same time? Maybe not. I remember, I think it was Kyle Davidson who expressed doubts once that he didn't want the other teams to hear all that was said at his own table, and that everybody's close to one another. So there's basically, you can help but overhear what's going on at a competitor's table, and that bothered him. I'm not sure if that sentiment is necessarily expressed by everybody, but that's out there. So all in all, I think that it'll be unfortunate. I think that this event is great for the NHL. It's like a festival. It draws a lot of attention to the league. And the fact that everybody's there is great. But it seems as though the GMs or maybe the owners saw things differently. So I hope they could reconsider these positions.
Well, I think because
I like to go to the draft.
I think it's a much better event to cover I don't know the extent to which it's better for the fans to have everyone in the same place, but from a storytelling perspective, um, it is good. And I keep bringing up the example of your story in 2019 when Cole Caulfield fell to the Canadians. I mean, how many of the GMs of the teams before the Canadians were you able to speak to, one after the other, after the other, after the other, in quick succession? You got what, 5 of them, 4 of them,
Probably
something
7
like
or
that,
8.
7 or 8. So
Yeah.
that night,
More than that.
like that
Yeah.
night, on the very same night, you had a comprehensive look at how Cole Caulfield got down to 15. Like, it was a perfect example of how a centralized draft allows us to tell better stories and to tell the real story of that night. In some instances, if you hustle for it, which you did that night. And that's the example I like to use of what the benefit is for the fans to have a centralized draft is it's very conducive to gathering a lot of information in a relatively short period of time so that the stories coming out of those nights can be comprehensive. Not to mention the agents that are on site, assistant GMs, like all sorts of people are there, just like the combine, really. So does the average fan care about that, or do they see that reality of it? I don't know. The other thing I would push back on with this move to decentralize the draft is that all of these teams will be flying all of their scouts and all of their people to their own cities and putting them up in hotels in their own cities regardless. So either you're flying them to the city of the draft and putting them up there, which with admittedly, gassed up hotel prices, or you're doing it in your own city because basically none of your scouts live in your city. Yes, your own management is based there, so that's a bit of a cost. That's a cost savings for sure, but you're still spending money to prepare for the draft and prepare for free agency. So it's the difference between that cost and the cost of flying to the city and putting them up there. So, I get the benefit. I get that some owners don't like to spend that extra money, as insignificant as it might be. But I think it is one thing that makes the NHL very unique in how they do the draft, and they should probably stick to it if I were in charge. Okay, let's go to one from Gabriel. He says, I remember at the 2022 draft, I read that Nick Bobroff thinks that it is important to have 3 consecutive really good drafts before having a contending team. I think I read that in a piece in The Athletic. You were correct. It was a piece that Marc-Antoine and I wrote. I wonder if you think that it's true, and if Habs management thinks it's true. And if so, do you think they would want to trade their next year's picks to have another top 10 pick this year? Thank you, guys. And I have a friend who did a trek 5 years ago in Newfoundland. Gabrielle. Another Newfoundland reference. I don't know. I mean, listen, Bobroff thinks that's true. I don't know the extent to which Ken Hughes thinks. I mean, it's based on his experience, right? Like, the Boston Bruins laid the groundwork for their Stanley Cup victory with having 3 consecutive strong drafts. The Los Angeles Kings laid the groundwork for their sort of dynastic, verging on dynasty kind of, cap dynasty team, with a series of really good drafts. And so that's really based on his own experience. Now, I kind of took a quick look, and, Edmonton kind of had that. They drafted Nurse, Draisaitl, McDavid 3 consecutive years, which laid the groundwork for the current team you see now. Florida, less so. Florida's really not built in a traditional way and didn't really, but, the Ekblad draft, but, they still got some pieces, not a whole lot. So that's a model that's not necessarily that. There's other ways to look. I mean, Dallas has had 3 consecutive good drafts in the past, and really, but the base of the question is valid. Would the Canadians trade their pick next year, let's say with some lottery protection, or maybe even without lottery protection, to get a pick in the top 10 this year? And I think they would. I really think they would. It's whether that trade is available or not, but it could be an interesting gamble for a team that doesn't think the Canadians will be all that good next year to get their first round pick with, like, let's say top 2 protection for, say, the 10th pick or the 9th pick, or, like, that's an interesting gamble. that I think the Canadiens would be willing to take because they seem to be very confident in their ability to take a step this season, but I don't think that is shared throughout the NHL.
Yeah. No, so. I don't have anything to add to this, but it's those are good points. Speaking of the of trading picks, David Cunningham said, you've mentioned that trading up hardly ever happens, but if Chicago is set to take a D, could you see Habs making an offer for their pick, maybe the Winnipeg pick, to pick swap and secure the forward that they want? Chicago would get a nice asset, plus still would get to pick a great D. I think that in the position that the Blackhawks are in, drafting number 2, they're in a situation to get the best player of the draft, not named Macklin Celebrini, in their minds. If you trade a few steps down, then you get more vulnerable to the decisions of other teams. So when you're a situation like Chicago is in right now, and they're looking for the highest potential talent, I don't think that the attraction of adding the number 26 pick to their draft war chest is necessarily something that attracts them enough to go from 2 to 5. Not to mention that it would not be enough for the Canadiens to move up from 5 to 2. It would take a lot more than number 26.
And also,
so there's the Blackhawks already have a second. It's a non-starter.
They already have a second first-round pick.
Second, yeah.
They have the 18th pick
in the late teens.
They have the 18th pick, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that weird trade with the Islanders got them the 18th pick. So yeah,
right.
There's no possible position where
I understand from a Canadiens fan. From a Canadiens fan's point of view, I understand why you're asking the question. But if I'm sitting on the Chicago side of things, there's no way we're doing that.
No, there's no chance. It's really not. Yeah. It wouldn't be enough. I mean, listen, if you added some assets to the 26th pick, then maybe we're talking. Like maybe if you add some young defensemen and whatever, like that's maybe. But even then, that second pick is basically like having the first pick in the draft. Like basically, you take Macklin Celebrini out of the draft, you have the first pick. Just kind of like the Canadiens did last year, where they basically had the first pick in the draft because everyone knew what the top 4 picks were going to be. Well, this year everyone knows what the top pick is going to be. Then the draft starts at you, and that's a good spot to be in. And that's would take a lot for the Blackhawks to move off that. And so, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, quickly here. We have a question from John. John in Ottawa. And so he asks, what is Mike Matheson's long-term future with the Habs? I imagine this is an important question for management to answer now for a few reasons. 1, because his value has never been so high. 2, because they're looking to make a trade to bring in an elite top 6 talent. And 3, because knowing if he's part of your core group for the next 3 to 7 years will help decide which left shot D are packaged in a deal this offseason or going forward. Then he goes on to kind of mention that he's a minute muncher. He drives offense. He's got big impact. He's a very professional. He's got a good influence on the young players, and he would protect Lane Hudson. It's been too delving into draft stuff. Lane Hudson would sort of insulate him for a while, and actually, just to add to the email, would actually be able to teach him. Also, doesn't love that Goulie's been playing his offside. So do you envision a Habs team 3 to 5 years down the road with Goulet, Matheson, and Hudson all on the left side? And if not, which of these players will be leveraged in a trade? Because you obviously have to give quality to get quality back. I will say something that I've already said, but I don't sense a real desire from the Canadiens to trade Mike Matheson right now. I understand that his value is really high, and that's not saying that they absolutely won't. But I don't think it's something they particularly want to do. And I keep repeating this, but it's worth repeating because we keep getting these questions. You can't have a defense corps full of young 20-year-olds, young 20, early 20 somethings. It's not conducive to having success in the NHL, and this team would like to start having some success. And I do think that they see Matheson as part of an eventual winning team in Montreal. I think that it's not inconceivable to have him perform into his mid 30s, let's say, which would be, 5 years from now, or at least till the end of his contract. This is, I think that's how the Canadians view this.
No, with the physical shape, that he's in, he could certainly do that.
Yeah. And so I don't think they don't feel the same urgency as a lot of the fan base seems to get what they can from Matheson now. There's also been a lot of questions centered around trading Kaiden Guhle, and I don't get the sense that the Canadians want to do that either. Now, it should be clear that in both cases, nothing's impossible. Like, I don't think any player on the Canadians is off the table, is untradeable, is a total lock to remain on the roster. I think they would be open to talking about a lot of things. They're one of the worst teams in the league, and I think they recognize that, so they have to be open to things. But I think it would take something somewhat extraordinary for them to move on Matheson. I think it would also take something pretty extraordinary to move on Guhle. But yeah, I mean, I don't know who else. I don't know how that's going to fit in terms of Hudson, Jacky, and then all the other guys, Struble, Harris, all the other left shot D they have. But what's clear is that the Canadians view left shot defense as an area of surplus, and that they're going to use that surplus to address other holes on the team. Which players are going to be used for that is really difficult to say. I can't say with any. Can you?
No, but when you talk about Guhle and you mentioned Jacky too, I mean, look, Guhle has already proven in his first 2 years in the NHL that he's a top 4 defenseman, and he's going to only get better. Whereas Jacky, who's an intimidating presence and who's got some untapped offensive capabilities, he's still, for the time being, a third pairing defenseman. And we've yet to see if he's going to become more than that. So I think that the track record and the ceiling, despite the unique aspect that Jacky provides, the rarity, I think that you compare the two players, and Guhle's the superior player. To me, there's no doubt. Jacky is super. He's a fun guy to have on your team. You want to have him. They're rare. There's like it's like there's a reason. I think we brought it up in a previous episode, but there's a reason why Radko Gudas, despite the fact that he's pretty much a third pairing defenseman, keeps getting that amount of money when he's ready for a new contract, because he's a rare commodity. So I think that I see Jacky a little bit along the same lines, probably a bit more offensive oriented, but still, I mean, I put that in a balance next to Guhle, and to me, Guhle is the guy that you absolutely need to keep. He's as close to an untouchable to me on the defense as the Canadians have, even more than Matheson. Actually, I understand all those questions about Matheson because of the fact that there's great value for his production versus his salary and all that, but he's also a local product. It's not lost on this team the fact that you have a dynamic defenseman. They don't have a ton of them that are proven at the NHL level. He's a dynamic defenseman, a top 10 skater in the league in their eyes, and he's from here. So there's a lot to like in that player. So, and it comes down to, it's a point I've made in the past also. It's, if he's gone, who do you replace him with? You need some veteran presence there. So they might part at some point with David Savard, but Matheson, they would need to get an offer that's so amazing to trade him. And they're not going to trade Mike Matheson to get number 10 or 11 on draft night. They're not going to scale back.
No. It would be to get a top 6 forward.
Trade a guy who's in his prime for more futures. So,
no.
Yeah,
it would be to add a top 6 forward piece. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, let's finish up. We have a question that we have to address because it came from our producer.
Yeah.
And so we have to address, Hayden Matheson produces this show. And if we don't get to his question, he might just not post the show. So let's do that. Hello, my esteemed hosts. Was wondering who you believe will be the first two players after Barkov to lift the cup if the Panthers win Tuesday night. Mine are Bobrovsky, then Okposo. So you go ahead. Who are your two picks?
Yeah, I think I heard Jeff Merrick mention the fact that there's something about the longest serving player on your team, which would make Aaron Ekblad being the guy.
Yes,
so
he would be
after
that guy.
Barkov, I would go with Ekblad. Yeah, Ekblad and Okposo. I mean, veteran. Yeah, I mean the oldest guy on the team has never won the cup. It would probably be Ekblad, then Okposo, and after Okposo, Bobrovsky. That's how I would go.
I would go Bobrovsky,
after
then
Barkov,
Ekblad.
Obviously.
Yeah, I would go Barkov, Bobrovsky,
and Ekblad? Okay.
Ekblad. Yeah, that's my pick. Well, okay. Well, that's going to be it for this week. Thanks to everyone for listening. Our next show will be on June 24th, Saint Jean-Baptiste here in Quebec, but also 4 days before the draft. So let's see if anything shakes loose this week. But regardless, we will talk to you next week, just before the draft in Vegas. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And we'll talk to you in a week.